So let's shift gears a little bit here. You know, a lot of people think of NSA as an intelligence agency. They have an information assurance directorate that is basically their focus is to develop capabilities to protect information, and occasionally they put out some guidance. And Stan, you took a little bit of a look at this, and they were providing some specific guidance around mass destructive malware.
Right. Well, there's been a lot of cases in the media, right, that talk about destructive malware taking down corporations, and NSA, I guess, I mean, they always release guidance, but here was focused on what to do with destructive type threats. And I think, you know, if you look at the guidance they have, and it's very good, I encourage everyone to do it who is in charge of protecting the enterprise, it's mostly standard things that we're kind of used to. You know, they're centered around preventing, detecting, and containing the threat. You know, make sure that you employ some sort of protection on your perimeter, something on the inside, monitor all the logging that you can. These are all complex ideas, but one thing that, you know, most major enterprises are aware of, but maybe some medium-sized ones or smaller ones kind of tend to forget, is this recovery. You know, be ready to respond to an incident. If a destructive malware type of incident occurs in your enterprise, what are you going to do to respond to it? So it's something important to consider, and the paper covers that and some of the aspects, you know, of the traditional, you know, kind of protecting yourself, monitoring it, but also don't forget about having a good plan for doing incident response and recovery.
Right. So, you know, I guess some of the things that kind of stuck out when I was taking a look at this is, you know, first of all, this notion of prevention. I mean, you know, obviously you want to try to prevent the event from occurring in the first place. But part of what they talked about, I think is generally good practice in any case, is the idea of segmenting networks off. That is, you know, don't let them into the entire enterprise. You know, if you have a large enterprise, you want to try to get it into smaller segments so that even if they did get into a portion of it, it makes it more difficult to get into other portions of the enterprise. And so, you know, some corporations are kind of structured that way inherently. Some others might have to do something deliberate in order to create.
Yeah, some of the
partitions.
bigger companies, right? They have the hierarchy. HR is a separate branch, and some other, you know, IT is something separate, and they might have their own systems. But, you know, at the same way, we've also seen people converging, you know, putting everything in one spot. It depends on each enterprise. That's why everybody kind of has to look at what they're doing, what is their business, and decide how to protect it the best way with what they've got. And the thing about putting things into separate enclaves, that's a very good principle of information assurance, right? Separation of privileges kind of speaks to that as well. And another thing that was interesting they pointed out is you make sure that your admin credentials are very well protected and are not reused everywhere. Things. Again, these are all standard kinds of preventative measures that we've kind of always described on the show and read about. Something important to know.
And I guess an observation of mine, for the few mass destructive malware the events that have occurred so far, I think in each one of those cases we can at least have some pretty good, reasonable expectation. The evidence points to, I should say, that the attackers had a reasonable amount of time within that enterprise gone undetected before the actual mass destructive malware event had occurred. In fact, you know, if you think about the things that would need to take place in order to conduct an event like that, they not only have to get into the enterprise, but they have to advance their credentials to the point where they would have some means to distribute the malware widely across the network, and they'd have to have some idea of how to conduct that and actually get it in there. And so I think an important aspect of this, I think that in some of the recommendations they pointed out got into some more specific areas, that is having a good analytical capability in place to identify, it's likely they're people, they're trying to map the network, they're trying to do things to support this activity that's going to potentially take place. And so you want to try to pick up any little mistakes that they make along the way that might reveal their presence and give you an opportunity to to eradicate that before there's even an opportunity to do a mass destructive malware event. So, kind of supporting that detection thing. I think it's a little more than detection. I think it's just having a good cognizance of what's going on and
right.
Picking up on the subtleties that might occur that are in advance of an attack like that. And then last, you'd mentioned the containing thing. I think we all do things, maybe not everybody, but we all try to do things to back up our systems, back up the data, be prepared for a failure of a system. But I don't think too many are thinking in terms of thousands of systems being wiped out.
Right.
And so you need to put a little thought into that. That is, you're not going to have necessarily resources to be able to restore all the systems at the same time. Just the virtue of having to download the data if it's on a network-based storage system, the challenges will be perhaps bandwidth. So I think it's going to be important to lay out your priorities. Who really needs to get back into service first? Is it the officers of the company or is it the finance organization? Is it HR to make sure that the paychecks get? So there are thoughts that need to be put into that in terms of what things can be put on the back burner for a little bit and what things really need to get done quickly to restore the capability. Maybe it's the folks that are actually doing the restorals you need to.
I think they need to have their own backups and maybe at least one or two machines that they can, a number of machines that they can immediately start launching a recovery effort from that were maybe cold spares sitting on the side, not on the network, not powered on, that can just be brought in for this purpose. And also, I think you're right that the prioritization of who needs to get back online first has to go with the business needs. If everybody goes down, do you need to bring up, is there a PR wing that has to be immediately responding to customers to say, we know what this is, we'd like to tell you as much as we can, what are the critical business functions, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we still have, from what I can tell, Sony is still reporting that some of their functions are not back up to speed because they're still reeling from the attacks back in December. So I think this is an exercise that I'd like to see more companies go through. I know it'd be a painful one for the first time out to say we are probably not prepared for many companies. But I do think it's going to be more and more important as this is becoming a more prevalent tactic.
And I'm glad you used the term exercise because I think practice ultimately is what makes perfect. Even practicing on small scale. Think about a group, imagine a scenario or actually, simulate a scenario where 20 people have their machines lost or, some servers lost or a handful of servers are lost and actually go through the exercise of restoring those, perhaps on separate resources so they're, it's just a whole dummy exercise. But that practice will be a good education in the kinds of things that, I hadn't thought about that. Doing is really the best learning tool.
Right, and even discussing the priority of who you're gonna bring up first is important because if the event happens and you haven't done that, I'm sure that each enclave of the business is gonna try to say, I'm the most important, bring me up first, and there's just gonna be a lot of confusion and chaos, and you don't want that in your incident response.
So perhaps a publicized prioritization plan so that people know what to expect, absolutely. And many organizations, they have a business continuity plan in place. And so to have a business continuity plan that deliberately considers the notion of mass destructive malware, I think is going to be a value aspect. To be able to tie those together, not necessarily treat it as a separate type of activity.
But when you call it mass destructive malware, though, I think you also have to consider the less scary name of ransomware, where you've got something like CryptoLocker or CTB Locker, where it has the same effect. All the important business-related files are going to be gone, and you better have a backup. So for people who are thinking, I'm not a nation-state target, I'm a small business, wait and see what happens when your main file server gets completely encrypted and you have no backup. I think it's the same effect. Actually, I shouldn't have said wait and see what happens. What I should have said is you get your stuff together right now and start thinking about it.
Well, actually, you make a good point. I think we've pointed out a number of times before that CryptoLocker is one that has the capability to go out and look for network attached storage. we have to keep in mind, if you have online backup systems, the online backup systems could potentially be subjected to a mass destructive malware event. So there need to be deliberate activities to isolate those so that they wouldn't necessarily be victimized in the same way.
If you can synchronize an offline backup system with the same files and have it ready for this case, I think this is an idea that's hit its prime already. Now that we've got this, I've seen CryptoLocker do it to network drives, and it is not pretty.
Yeah.